Hi guys, what we're going to work on today is converting tenths to hundredths. We're going to do this with fractions and with decimals. So let's take a look at one of our assignments from last week. So what we did last week is we noticed how tenths and hundredths were equivalent. And with the first one, we noticed that 1/10 was the same as 10 hundredths. For the second one, we noticed that 8/10 is the same as 80 hundredths. And we also noticed that 3/10 is the same as 30 hundredths. Okay, so let's take a look here at what we notice. Okay, so 8/10 equals 80 hundredths. Do you see any connection between 8/10 and 80 hundredths? Think about fractions and think about what we would do in order to find equivalent fractions. Do you remember whatever you do to the top, you do to the bottom? Whatever you do to the bottom, you do to the top. So let's see. 10 times 10 equals 100. 8 times 10 equals 80. Let's see if that works for the other one. 3/10 is equal to 30 hundredths. So 10 times 10 equals 100, and 3 times 10 equals 30. So in order to go from 8/10 to 80 hundredths, I had to multiply my numerator and my denominator by 10. Same thing, to go from 3/10 to 30 hundredths, I had to multiply my numerator and my denominator by 10. So let's see, looking at 6/10, what do you think I'm going to do in order to find what it's equal to in hundredths? Well, I noticed that 10 times 10 is 100, so what I do to the bottom, I must do to the top. 6 times 10 equals 60. 6/10 is equal to 60 hundredths. Okay, now let's look at it in the decimal form. Okay, so I noticed that 8/10 is equal to 80 hundredths. So what do I notice has happened there? Well, I noticed that 8 times 10 is 80. I also noticed that it's just like adding a 0 at the end. I noticed that 3 times 10 equals 30. And it was just like adding a 0 at the end. So when you have tenths and decimals, you can always add a 0 to the end to make it into hundredths and to make sure that they have, if you need something to be in the hundredths place value. So let's think about 6/10. 6/10 is going to be equal to what? Well, I know it's times 10, which is 60 hundredths. And I just added a 0. All right, let's look at a couple examples together, and then you'll be able to go ahead and work on your classwork. All right, let's take a look at these and convert these fractions that are in tenths into hundredths. All right, so 3 and 4/10, so I have a mixed number here, so my 3 is obviously going to just stay the same. And now I'm converting this into hundredths. So 4/10 is equal to 40 hundredths. So 3 and 4/10 is equal to 3 and 40 hundredths. Okay, let's look at this one here, 2/10. 2/10 is equal to 20 hundredths. 20 hundredths. We just say times 10. Times 10. 10 times 10 is 100. 2 times 10 is 20. All right, 19 and 1/10. 19 and, let's see, in order to get hundredths, I multiply by 10. So that would be 100. And that would be 10. 19 and 10 hundredths. So I'm just adding a place value there. 6 and 9/10. 6 and 90 hundredths. All right, next we're going to take a look at decimal format. Okay, so I notice now that all of these decimals are in tenths. Okay, do you agree? Good. Now we want to change them to hundredths. Now in order to change these to hundredths, I know that I looked at my actual tenth and I can multiply by 10 and that'll give me the value of hundredths. So 4 times 10 is 40. So 3 and 40 hundredths. 2 tenths, 2 times 10 is 20, so it's 0 and 20 hundredths. 19 and 1 tenth, 1 times 10 is 10, so it's 19 and 10 hundredths. 6 and 9 tenths, 9 times 10 is 90, so 6 and 90 hundredths. Again, let's notice something about these. What do you notice happens when you go from tenths to hundredths? From tenths to hundredths, from tenths to hundredths, and from tenths to hundredths. What do you notice happens when you're going from tenths to hundredths? Well, if you said it's times 10, yes, you are correct. It is. As we go from tenths to hundredths, we can multiply by 10 to figure out the equivalent hundredths. Oh, and you also notice that really, by multiplying by 10, we were just adding a 0 at the end. Let's go back and look at the same thing with the fractions. Okay, so what do you notice when going from tenths to hundredths? From tenths to hundredths. From tenths to hundredths. What do you notice? Yep, it's 10 times greater. Actually, it's equivalent, but the value of the digit is 10 times greater. Or, yep, you were just adding a 0 to add an extra place value. Just adding a 0 to add an extra place value. All right, so we're going to take a look at the classwork for today. Okay, so this is what your classwork looks like today. It says convert the tenths to hundredths. So you're going to do that in the form of fractions, and then you're going to also do that in the form of decimals. So for the fractions, you have 8 problems, and for the decimals, you also have 8 problems. Again, this is on a Google slide, so you're able to type your answer into the text box, or if you have a touch screen, you write it with your finger, or you print it and write it and then send a picture. All right, so just to go over what you have to do so you're clear on that. 3 tenths is equal to, of course, that's the way that's going to go. Okay, so 3 tenths is equal to 30 hundredths. So remember, in order to figure that out, times 10 times 10, and we get our equivalent fractions for tenths and hundredths. So you're going to do the same thing for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. And remember, if it's a mixed number, your equivalent fraction must also be a mixed number. So for number 3, 2 and 9 tenths is going to be 2 and 90 hundredths. You need to make sure you have your whole number. Okay, so that's what you're doing for the left side. And now on the right side, you're converting in the form of decimals. So 4 tenths is equal to 40 hundredths. Okay, so that's all you have to do. Remember, if it has a whole number, you need to include that. So 6 and 5 tenths is 6 and 50 hundredths. Okay, so you're going to complete this, and then you're either going to take a picture and submit it through Google Classroom if you printed it out, or you're just going to hand turn it in, and then you're going to be done for the day. All right, I'll see you later at our Zoom.